Distinguished presidents, dear participants, it will be a very extraordinary session, having assembled here 5 of the foremost personalities of this region, and we will discuss, as it is indicated in the program, how can Latin America become a more prosperous, democratic, integrated, and globally relevant region over the next decade. But before presenting the panel to you, and before raising the first questions, and I hope you will be very much involved into the discussion, I would like to use this opportunity to thank you, President Uribe, on behalf of all the participants for the wonderful evening we had yesterday and your hospitality. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. We have, as I mentioned, an extraordinary panel, and I was looking again at the life stories of all the presidents assembled here this morning, and I have to say those are extraordinary life stories, and I'm unfortunately not able to go into details, so I would urge you to look at least at our participants list. But I have the pleasure and honor to have here and to welcome President Colom from Guatemala, President Fernandez from the Dominican Republic, President Lugo from Paraguay, President Martinelli from Panama, and President Uribe, of course, of Colombia. Please join me in giving them a very warm welcome. Now, my first question is related to regional integration. It has been mentioned often during the discussions of the last 36 hours. I think there's a feeling, Mr. President, among the participants, that there is a great potential, but the realization has not gone, the realization of regional integration has not gone so far as it could have been in the last years. So my question is, how do you see Latin America as an entity, as a regional power? And what has to be done, particularly, to achieve your objective? What is your vision for Latin American integration? And I think that's a good start for our discussion, provided that everybody sticks to the time limit of 3 minutes. And may I start with you, President Lugo?
Muchas gracias.
Why, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I think that this is a wonderful starting point, Mr. Schwab, and I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to greet my fellow presidents of Latin America. I am convinced that Latin America is one yet different, and I cannot depart from my theological origins. We had visited Medellin in the past, and in the 60s, we were told that Latin America presents similarities and significant contrast. And I think that many essays have been run in the area of integration in Latin America. The first integration was something that the government of Paraguay bet on, the Rio Group, the OAS, the Mercosur organization. So we have rationally come to understand that we need integration, and it is necessary, yet it requires having certain characteristics. I think that small countries, particularly landlocked countries like Paraguay and Bolivia, have certain disadvantages in terms of integration. We have bet on integration, we've bet on full integration, and we have frequently only bet on commercial integration, on trade integration, and that process limped when we looked at the political and social aspects of integration, and we therefore have bet on the integration of Latin America. We do not see a promising future for our continent if we do not bet on the actual integration. I tend to criticize the meetings that bring together heads of states where we simply smile for the pictures and we're all brothers and we understand each other and we're all very good. But when it comes to the day-to-day, when the potato, when the pineapple of Paraguay has to cross a border of Argentina to get to Chile, we have difficulties. And I believe that integration has to be an integration with equity. I am convinced that the sharp contrasts between countries, particularly Paraguay that has many disadvantages, we are a Mediterranean country between two giants, which are Brazil and Argentina, have our difficulties. But given all that, given all the difficulties we have, given all the mistakes we can make along the way, Paraguay as a country, as a government, has bet on the actual real integration of Latin America. We have brotherly, good, solidarity relationships with many other Latin American countries, and I think that's an example in itself. An example that reveals that integration is possible. It is possible to think in plural terms in our continent, to have trade integration, economic integration, cultural integration. We have common roots, an integration that could be political as well. I think that we all agree on strengthening our democratic institutions because what is at stake is our future. And we must, in this integration, take care of our overwhelmingly endangered biodiversity. I don't want to take more time than the 3 minutes allotted to me. I will be very strict in the use of time. I hope my colleagues will follow suit so that we can profit from this debate.
President Martinelli, and maybe you would also add one point how what you are doing now with the Suez Canal, with the Panama Canal. You see, I still have a European perspective. I'm looking south instead of looking west. But how this could potentially contribute also to Latin American integration?
Muchas gracias, primero que todo.
Thank you very much. I too would like to greet my fellow presidents and you, Mr. Schwab. Integration is something that we must seek as quickly as possible, but we must also look at our historical roots because we cannot compare Latin America to Europe. Europe's integration has been a success, and that integration is the result of need. But we must look at the historical roots that have led Latin America to be a big number of countries apparently similar, yet very, very different. And maybe that's a result of our Spanish heritage that prevented us from trading amongst ourselves, and we had to trade via Seville. And simultaneously, we have the same religion, we have the same language. But in Europe, integration was far more reaching, in spite of the fact that in Europe, the history of the world and that of the different countries was based on ethnias and tribes that were at war for many years. They warred amongst each other for many years. You even had world wars, and maybe that's what it took to sit you all at the same table and for you to come to an agreement and to talk to each other. I wonder whether communism in Russia forced that integration in Europe much, much faster than would have been expected in Latin America. We all speak of integration, like President Lugo has just said. We all want integration. However, when we get to the nitty-gritty of integration, when one has to state things clearly, each country starts to fight for its own industries or agriculture or the services that such a country can supply. So what it would take for us to integrate, something that I don't see in the very near future, is a much broader attitude, an attitude that is far more open on the part of all rulers. And we must start thinking that it is best to be united as a group and fight together against all the other blocs than to stand alone and wage individual wars. We have to take away this Maginot line from our heads, a line that is in the minds of too many of our fellow citizens who believe that integration isn't highly beneficial. We must, on the contrary, think beyond that and shift and break all paradigms to ensure that integration will be a reality. This may be my 101 in politics. And I do see that there is a great intent between what is said and an overwhelming lack of execution in what is done. However, I do believe that need will lead Latin America to, on the medium run, seek true integration, and that integration must go hand in hand, not with someone who imposes him or herself on others, but rather to find commonalities, points of convergent, common interest amongst the different countries to identify and profit from the competitive advantages of every country. And now, Mr. Schwab, the Panama Canal is going to open up Latin America, because once we finish the expansion of the Panama Canal in the year 2014, we will change the quality of life of all of Latin America, because the ships built to cross the Panama Canal are called Panamax, because that was the size of the locks. Now we're going to have the post-Panamaxes, and they can carry up to 13,000, 14,000 containers. And that is going to become a true opportunity that will allow Latin America to export to the world many products, mining products, agricultural products, and also to import. And that is going to translate into a significant reduction in cost and in the cost of living throughout Latin America. And I think that's a very important starting point. And yes, I would like to ask all my fellow presidents to deploy an earnest effort towards integration, and that we go beyond pretty words and declarations. And let's, like they say in English, put our money where your mouth is.
Buenos días.
Very good morning to each and every one of you. First and foremost, thank you for inviting me to this forum. I would like to thank President Uribe for the kindness showered upon us since our arrival in Colombia. Thank you for your warmth and your kindness, and I greet my fellow presidents. In my 2 months in office, I must honestly and candidly say that I have seen, like never before, an overwhelming energy between Latin American countries. I recall the Rio meeting and the Salvador de Bahia meeting, when there was a significant degree of harmony. And I at least believe that more so than integration, we should speak of harmony in Latin America, because harmony allows us to respect our differences and to profit from our similarities. In the specific case of Guatemala, we had never seen that degree of energy we find in South and Central America. Significant Colombian investment in Guatemala, that is unprecedented. Significant Mexican investment in Guatemala that had never been seen before, and now we have them in Guatemala. I believe that spirit of harmony is being nurtured by the current global situation. These are very peculiar times, and I think that we are going through a phase of change, and I would speak of a change of era. This change of of era is a change that brings to mind President Fernandez when you said that this was a crisis that is not a simple crisis. This is a financial crisis affecting all civilization. It's a power crisis. It's a thematic crisis. It's a multiplicity of crises that are heralding a change of civilization. And in this change of civilization, Latin America has much to contribute because of its cultural wealth, its human wealth, its natural resource wealth, because of its wealth of opportunities. And even though we have our differences in our different countries, I think that is a wonderful opportunity in itself, so that the entire continent as a whole can profit from that change of epoch, that change of era. And I'm sure that the forum chose this day at a very special time. I don't know whether you have Maya blood. This is the day for E, where the four cardinal points of the world converge and agree to set a safe road, a road with and a vision. And I think that if we respect our differences in our countries, in our cultures, whilst we profit and make the best of all our potential, I see an American continent that would be in much greater harmony today than in its past. And I see that we should make the best of the opportunities before us. We in Central America have encountered many problems, particularly last year. And I don't see, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the efforts of President Fernandez and all the support he has given us. I never forget that day in December when he helped us normalize the situation in Honduras. And I think that the next couple of days are going to be very important in normalizing the situation in Central America. Central America is Guatemala's best trading partner. They're our brothers. And we believe that the Central American region must also become a part of that harmony in coming days. So yes, I believe that the word harmony, the term harmony, can achieve far more results than integration, because sometimes, we must make too many trade-offs in integration, trade-offs that we have not been historically willing to trade off or to accept. I would like to thank the World Economic Forum once again for giving me the chance to be here.
Fernandez, and if I may ask you, we just heard the reference made to Honduras, and we all know you played a very important role. If in your remark you would just add a comment on Honduras and the situation, how do you see it?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. President Uribe, thank you for the hospitality given to us and all my colleagues, dear friends. Ladies and gentlemen, before answering your question directly, allow me to refer briefly to President Uribe and to what he represents, because I believe that his specific political situation is going to force all Latin American democracies to reflect on what will become of us in the 21st century. Because every time we look at the opinion polls published here in Colombia or published in the hemisphere like the Latino Barometro, President Uribe has a special trait, and he breaks all these barometers. His popular support surpasses 70%. And in spite of having that massive support of his people due to institutional constraints, President Uribe will not be able to present his name as presidential candidate in the upcoming election. But I think that we must dwell on looking at this popular support versus the constitutional constraints. He will no longer be able to run for president next time around, but maybe in the year 2012, 2016, he deserves our acknowledgement for his leadership and for all the contributions to democracy and security and peace in Colombia and all of Latin America. So we congratulate and commend you, President Uribe. Now, regarding the issue of Honduras you were asking about, Professor Schwab, I think that there is this unanimous consensus everywhere in the sense that what happened in Honduras is known technically as a coup d'etat. And vis-a-vis that coup d'etat, there was a unanimous reaction that started with the Organization of American States that condemned that coup d'etat. And we saw this at the level of each of the individual countries of the region who rejected the coup and suggested the return to democracy through President Zelaya, the ousted president. The same thing happened with the UN, as did the Arab League of Countries, the Association of African Unity. So I would say that this is a case that is truly impressing, where we saw all the organizations of the world, be they regional, sub-regional, express themselves against a coup d'etat and wanting to return to constitutional order. Nonetheless, it turned out that the ousted president was not reestablished in office, and that presented a problem. And we look at the efficacy of global governance, the efficiency of international law, or the collective defense of democracy. And we have in the Democratic Charter of the U.S. enshrined the collective defense of democracy, the non-recognition of a de facto government that has interrupted the constitutional order. I think that there is a void in the sense that we cannot reestablish the previous order, and that it will necessarily force us to reflect in the future as to the scope of the Democratic Charter of the OAS and the role of the United Nations, the coercive power that could be used within the framework of international law and multilateralism to reestablish democratic order. And I must add that this is a subject that dates back many years in the academia. We actually went back to the Betancourt doctrine of the late 50s, where we see the non-recognition of a de facto government, a government that has come to power through means that were not legitimate. So I think that what Honduras teaches us is what to do as a hemispheric collective response to a case of interruption or suspension of constitutional order. I today would say, after time has passed, that the debate must take place at a different level. Yes, elections have taken place in Honduras. A president has been elected, and his candidacy had been formalized before the coup d'etat. The debate has been revolved around whether that new government is or not illegitimate, even though it was elected by popular vote. We believe that we cannot say that the new government is illegitimate, though it was elected under very difficult conditions in the country, and these would be institutional conditions. So one should ask oneself whether the government of Patricio Aylwin in Chile was illegitimate, because it resulted from a dictatorship, which was a dictatorship of General Pinochet, and no one questioned the legitimacy of that government. Therefore, I am convinced that what we have rather is an interest on the part of Latin American countries, so that with the return to democracy in Honduras through electoral means, this could be expanded on the basis of political dialogue, commitment to democracy, and therefore all the sectors of Honduran life, including former President Zelaya and his followers, can fully integrate themselves into the democratic life of Honduras. But to question the legitimacy of the process is something that I believe that goes beyond what circumstance presents. But we must acknowledge the legitimacy, engage in a political dialogue, then reconciliation, and then the inclusion of the different sectors of political life, so that there is full inclusion. And I think that we are progressing in that direction. President Álvaro Colom, President Funes in El Salvador, President Oscar Arias in Costa Rica, President Martinelli in Panama, we in the Dominican Republic are moving in that direction of achieving the full integration of Honduras in the democratic system, and that sanctions be lifted by the OAS, and that Honduras be recognized as a valid actor in the hemispheric democratic system of Latin America. Thank you very much.
I think it's a very promising test of a collective approach to a specific problem based on democratic and institutional principles. Thank you. President Uribe, would you like to comment again on the issue of regional integration?
Gracias.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. Allow me, on behalf of every Colombian, to reiterate to you, to the entire World Economic Forum, our deep felt gratitude, the affection with which we welcome all the presidents from our sister nations, and to you all. Let us now look at the continent from its southern angle. We see the weakening of the Andean community, and what we see today is that South American union can be achieved through the Andean community and Mercosur systems, and maybe what divides us in the Andean community would help us reunite ourselves to the extent we all integrate to Mercosur. That's something that I see coming in the future. Second, what we can come to call the Central American Bloc and the Mesoamerica vision. This administration participated there as a bridge with South America. And in that respect, I'd like to say that it has been consolidated for two reasons. The Honduras problem was going to break it. Overcoming the Honduras problem consolidates the process, as did the prudence of the new government in El Salvador. I would like to add that at the origin of the Honduran problem, it wasn't just a coup d'etat. We must look at a process of undue intervention by oil, petroleum, that brought with it an internal upheaval that resulted in that coup d'etat. Regarding the Caribbean now, one finds great soundness in its structures. I think that the battle waged by Mexico against terrorism demands the region's full solidarity. And what worries me is the following: that what Mexico is doing is the right road. Nonetheless, that's what makes the news. What worries me is that many countries have a problem as serious as that of Mexico and have not stood up to it yet. And since it hasn't been faced, it's not news. I think that Mexico has to be supported, and our concern must be geared toward those countries that have not yet faced the problem. UNASUR is a very interesting political process in itself. It has taken a good step, yet it has many flaws. A good step that the Security Council rejected violent movements, but they have done nothing in practice to combat them. We have not seen a decided action aimed at combating terrorism and narcotics trafficking. That has not gone beyond theoretical statements. And let me end, Professor, by saying that I believe that it is necessary to revindicate the principle of non-intervention with Honduras in mind, but we must also revindicate the principles of the democratic charters. And it's been very serious. The breaching of this democratic charter from different aspects, the passiveness with which they are looking at terrorism, that is a flagrant violation of the charter, and that affects any process of unity.
Let me turn to another crucial issue which has come up again and again. Latin America may be not the poorest region in the world, but it's the region with the biggest gap between poor and rich. Inequity, I think it has been used by you, is a key word which was mentioned again and again. It is also related, of course, to terrorism. It's related to many other problems which are shaking the region. Now, what do you foresee, and what do you propose, and what do you have in mind in your policies in order to address this issue of inequity and to close the gap between the rich and the poor in this region? I may start with you, President Uribe.
Allow me to repeat here hear something I've told my fellow countrymen many times in the past. Investment, and it's important to repeat it at this forum, investment is not an end in itself. It is a means. And hand in hand with social responsibility can become a means to overcome poverty and to generate equity. To ignore investment is as serious as turning a blind eye on social responsibility of investment. What do we see in Colombia? If there is no investor trust, foreign investment won't come, and Colombian investment goes overseas. And since the poor don't have anything to take with them to the rest of the world, they are the ones who suffer the most when the money leaves the country, or simply when the money doesn't come. So we have to relate all these efforts to promote investment with that goal of overcoming poverty and generating equity. And how to go about doing it? How can we achieve that social responsibility? I would say that the great challenge for Latin America is the education revolution, and we in Latin America find great progress in coverage in children's nutrition, and we still have many quality-related challenges. There is still a very big gap in mathematics and sciences between Latin American students and students from developed countries, and there we must attach great emphasis.
Bueno, además de suscribir todo cuanto ha dicho el presidente Uribe, con quien comparto plenamente sus criterios, pienso que para, digamos, tener una intelección de este problema, hay que tomar en cuenta las variaciones que ha habido en la estructura social latinoamericana en los últimos tiempos. No cabe duda que la América Latina de hoy día no es la América Latina de 40 años atrás.
There is no doubt that Latin America today is very different from the past, from the demographic perspective. This is a very young continent. Most of the population is below the age of 25. And we have also seen an interesting structural change in the way in which our societies have changed from being rural populations to urban. 70% of Latin American populations live in cities and urban centers today, and the fact that they live in cities brings with it the problem of the challenges of the 21st century. It's a fact that there's been an accelerated phenomenon of urbanization, of urban development that has taken place in 50 years. In Europe, this urbanization took some 200 years, and urbanization has occurred within a context where industrial development has been lacking. Therefore, rural migration to cities does not imply the conversion of rural labor to urban workers. In general, what happens is in a context of service economy, this accelerated migration does not translate into productive labor, so we see the resulting social marginalization, and in the outskirts we see a new social phenomenon that can be now called Latin American urban poverty. And I believe that's the dark side of the phenomenon. Now, the bright side is that we have seen the expansion, the growth of the middle class, and that situation of inequity of the past in the old Latin American oligarchies where we had 14 families holding all the wealth. Today, it's different. We have seen clearer social mobility, a larger middle class, and what we have is an informal sector of the economy, a sector that has been unable to integrate itself into the legal system, and these are the pockets of poverty that we see all over. How do we overcome that? I think that President Uribe has given us the answer. The only sustainable way to do so on the long term to overcome the situation is through education. Now, the issue with education in Latin America today is not a problem of coverage, it's a quality problem. And it's a quality problem that relates to the K-12. But something else that worries us very much in Dominican Republic is the quality of higher education. This produces fear in us when we see that amongst the 200 leading universities in the Shanghai ranking, there isn't a single Latin American university. And I think that to the extent that Latin American universities are not on that global quality ranking, then the gap between the rich and the poor is going to be more visible between the advanced world and the developing world. And in Latin America, we have not managed to link to higher education issues such as research, development, and innovation. Where are the innovation centers that would allow us to add value to our production in our different services? Therefore, the issue is how to relate education to an intensive labor model that we've had in Latin America, to a capital-intensive model that will allow us to ensure our linkage into the global market. And that's part of the problem. There is this process of transition, of the demographic, social, structural transition that has not gone hand in hand with a historical tradition, as has been the case in Europe and the US. But simultaneously, the biggest challenge today is how to bring about a quality education throughout the region. I would like to relate this question to the previous question. Harmony in Latin America will improve to the extent that we see harmony inside each country. I would say that equilibrium and social cohesion and productivity is the biggest challenge that all rulers face. How to bring together the social effort with this productivity effort. In the specific case of Guatemala, I agree with President Uribe and President Fernandez in the sense that education is key. Education, constitutionally, used to be free. But no, actually, we charged for education. We, last year, dared to go for free education and free health. And now we see that 37% more youths are in high school, in secondary education, and that is the highest level ever. And if we look at the last 8 years and add them up together, they won't add up to 27% in primary school. So education is the bet for the future. Inequality can only be reduced through education and opportunities. As for security, Honduras, Salvador, and Guatemala have a very serious problem. We have gangs, problems, and this is a problem in Asia, and that is the result of not having a school or a health center in the neighborhood because we are not giving our youths a future. And I think that actual social cohesion plus a decided effort to improve productivity are the solution. I am convinced, and today I was talking with my Microsoft friends, a youth today without a computer is overwhelmingly much poorer than a youth that does have a computer. That mere difference of owning a computer. And in Guatemala, it's a novelty to bring computers to rural areas. It should not be a novelty. It should be something natural. But to see a youth, a boy or a girl in a village, consulting Socrates, connected to the world, their poverty there has been reduced. And I therefore believe that this gap, that this inequity requires everyone's commitment. I remember that when I was sworn into office, I said I believe that the economy have to be worked with a profound social responsibility, and the social has to be worked with a profound economic responsibility. And I am convinced that to achieve that equilibrium is the challenge that will help to the harmony of our countries. In Honduras, we have a situation that worries us. It is a sister nation. It is a very good friend. This morning I spoke to President Lobo, and the truth is that we must deploy overwhelming efforts to include democracy and the rule of law, and also to include this equilibrium. For example, the issue of narcotics trafficking and terrorism that we're all suffering. The other day, President Uribe said to me, I'm sorry that our cocaine ends up in your country. And I said, no, that's not a Colombian shame. That's a regional shame. We must stand up to this aggression that our countries are living. President Uribe is doing a great job in that respect. And we must do so like President Calderon is doing in Mexico. And we must all start by admitting that this is a problem that affects us all. The insecurity problem in Guatemala is not just our problem. This is a problem that affects the entire region and every country in the region. And we will only stand up to it if our countries are better educated and have better access. In Guatemala, only 4 of every 100 youths graduate from university. So we have to work very hard so that all youths can have access to higher education. And that is, education is the best vaccine to counter inequity. I'd say that's the formula.
Presidente Martinelli, thank you very much. I think that is the biggest challenge that the Latin American democratic system has, the big inequality between the rich and the poor. With the advent of cable TV, of the internet, and in many cases also with the unnecessary bragging that many people do in their own countries, that creates a big difference among citizens in a country. I totally agree with the fact that education is a fast, although medium-term solution of this problem, but we also have to channel this problem in a more concrete manner. I remember my son, the reason why I'm sitting here, my son is sitting here as the president of Panama, is because of a conversation I had with him and 4 of his friends, his schoolmates, in youngsters that attended a very good school, Georgetown in that case, and we were eating in a restaurant, and I asked them, what do you want to do with your lives? And they said to me they wanted to stay in the States. All the youngsters that were sitting there with me said the same thing. That's why I was so surprised to see that my son, as well as his friends, were good people and didn't want to return to their countries. They wanted to stay in the States. And they said to me, it's because of the lack of opportunities. And they said to me, that lack of opportunities is what makes many youngsters feel frustrated. All the rulers, the leaders that are here, have come to power because of the popular vote on our commitment that we'll build more schools, labor opportunities will be improved, transportation will be improved. And when we come to power, we feel powerless because of the amount of problems that we can solve. And we are discussing this, and we see those things as a huge challenge. That's why we have a commitment to do it well, because the democratic regime that rules Latin America, if it doesn't solve problems for Latin America, if it doesn't break or close the gap between the wealthy and the poor, the same constituents can be drawn by sirens singing and will join people that will do it otherwise, by them attracted by the mermaids. That's the only way how a country can come ahead. But also, big expenditures have to be made as far as social investment, improving health systems, pension systems, schooling, transportation, to improve the quality of life, the standard of living. And here in Latin America, we have to start to break. Perhaps the first question was more important than the others. The need to become a commonwealth, for us to become a continent without borders, so that the people from the different centers can flow and mobilize freely. There's still many borders that won't allow the youngsters who graduate from good universities to have access to a good working place. We need the stock exchanges of the various countries to open up more for family companies to sell stocks, to become public, And my own family company is full of our relatives, and I accept it. I know it's not well done. I think that all youngsters who graduated, who did a sacrifice and effort to have a better life, to have an opportunity, leaders have that huge responsibility of being able to honor our promises towards the mayors, our deputies, the people we appointed, that appointed us, the constituents, because I know that we, all presidents of the area, say the same things and promise the same things for the good of our people. Inequity is killing us, and I repeat, as everyone has stated that, and I fully agree, equal opportunities can only be reached by providing the same opportunities, trying to transform curricula, trying to provide free internet to everyone, to professionalizing and training our teachers. In the case of Panama, we're doing a direct transfer to the poor, providing them a scholarship or a monthly allowance. We're providing free textbooks and any school supplies. It's not like turning on a switch on and off that you fix things very fast, but people's need, when you have a nice luxury car with a chauffeur and the other one is riding a bus without air conditioning, it takes hours, that is slow, hot. That inequity, when they come by and they see the beautiful, wonderful things you can do in the internet, when you go to malls and you see their handbags that cost $6,000, the shock our citizens suffer is what makes them think that the democratic system and our rulers, our leaders, are the ones that are going to solve their problems. This problem, I believe, has to be dealt with, I don't know, surely when there is a forum in a different country, hopefully the inequity issue will be approached. It doesn't exist only in Latin America, but in other countries, in other regions. But in other regions, it is not as obvious as it is in a region such as Latin America. Gracias, Presidente Lugo. I think you put your finger on the spot with this question. I think it is the paradigm, the one that should be changed in Latin America. This challenge, this huge gap between the powerful, the wealthy, and the so-called poor class is not as simple as it sounds. And I wouldn't like to make a simple analysis because of the time limitations we have to approach the issue. I agree with my other colleagues that education is a key to build a more equitable society. But we also have to accept, and here I think what Lula said in Davos comes to my memory. He said it was the time not of partial temporary solutions, but looking for long-term structural solutions. In Paraguay, education has an extensive coverage, 90% perhaps. But when we bet on education, and a while ago we were in the swearing-in ceremony of President Mujica, I was asking a question. Education for what? Education for what type of society? Education because there are many, at least in Paraguay, that are professionals, are university graduates. As President Fernandez said, they are street vendors coming into the informal economy. I'm increasingly convinced that we have to restructure education into a creative model for Latin America, I would call it education for work, because I don't know any other type of revolution that has brought about change that is not work. I wouldn't like to forget Pope John Paul II said that work is the intimate vocation that returns dignity to man. And I think this is very much related to insecurity, to violence as well. We could ask, who are those that are part of that huge conglomerate that oftentimes has no other way out than to resort to stealing and violence? How many have fallen to join gangs, as what Martin said, not having the least chance? I've always believed that poverty is also a lack of opportunities, and I think this poverty as a lack of opportunities is what we have to open up the gates of society for the construction of a democracy that gives everyone an opportunity. I think that Latin America has gone through a time of ignorance, of neglect, without opportunities for people. I don't want to sound too pessimistic. Martin Bull in Paraguay said, there are small experiences, because poverty and the poor is not a danger on itself or to themselves. It's a danger for the creation of that equitable, fair, just, and peaceful society. Many people say that poverty is a time bomb. Who doesn't see in the news the groups, the gangs of poor in Rio de Janeiro, and those poverty belts and those shanty towns that are time bombs? If they don't join that big belt of poverty, without possibilities, without a profession, without the possibility of a worthy job. I want to ensure and assure you that education is the path. It is a tool to continue to build a more equitable, solidary, and egalitarian society. But I also want to ask the question, education for what? A profound educational reform in Latin America can be a key that opens the door for the construction of a society where this huge gap can really disappear. And as I said before, education, yes, but education for work that will return dignity to people, to society. You see that a lazy society, a society that doesn't have a purpose, can be a bomb. As a professor, you had an opportunity to work in Germany, where there is a concern for people. There is a concern when we create a society that is idle, without opportunities, without a profession, without skills. I think that's the key that we should continue to work on. And also the question, let's not have this as a declaration, as a statement, and as a speech. Let's make an effort for our universities to have good level universities. How we Paraguayans can go to school. If we had a chance to go to school abroad, those that went to school in Europe, there is a big difference. That's why education is key, but also education for work that will return people their dignity, opportunities, so they won't have a chance to beg, because the idea is not to create a society of beggars, but a society that can provide equal opportunities, create a more equitable society. And we politicians have to strengthen our weak, fragile democracies. We have a historical moment to construct, to build more democratic, just, and opportunistic societies. Bueno, quisiéramos detener.
So much to ask questions, but to make a very short comment in terms of what you have heard. And I will take 3 or 4 comments, and afterwards I may ask the presidents to react on 1 or 2 of those comments. Anybody who would like to raise? Yes, please.
Luis Furlan from Brazil. Voy a hablar en español mejor.
English. I'll speak in English. Portuñol. In countries, the access to a broadband is a big expense. They charge 20% and they use 42% tax for the use of the broadband. Wouldn't be a good path to eliminate taxes on connectivity through the broadband? Vamos a recibir otro comentario.
Who has the microphones? Yeah, okay.
Father Joseph Philippe from Haiti.
Joseph.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think the empowerment of the young people is the key to fight against poverty in Latin America.
Thank you. Some other comments? Here also were some comments.
¿Comentarios? Por favor, le pueden pasar un micrófono.
Stephen Donahue, de McClarty Associates in Washington. Quisiera comentar sobre...
Washington. I want to comment on the diversion of resources that are going to militarism and the purchase of unnecessary military equipment for the region. And if you have a chance to explain what that means as far as having the necessary resources to have the same education, health reforms, and the things that really have a true impact on the lives of people in the region.
Comment here, or 2 actually.
Luis Javier Castro, presidente de la Red Central.
I am the chairman of the Central American Network in favor of social responsibility. Thank you for your comments. I want to ask you, what are you doing in your countries to promote public and private alliances to improve the social situation? Juan Quiroz in Brazil. My question is how to fight in our Latin American governments against corruption. How many funds are lost, wasted, with administrations or governments that are not corrupt, but also where there are corrupt officials, where there's no clear transparency on how resources are allocated or used. Much corruption to avoid an important mass of resources to get out of the circuit and not to be received by society.
Senator-elect. I noticed that no one really spoke very much about the role that the United States should or should not play in the integration in Latin America, and I'm just concerned, I'm wondering if in some way the United States has failed its southern brothers and sisters.
There's quite an array of questions, and I don't expect, or we don't expect from each of the presidents to respond to all of those issues. So may I ask the presidents to pick 1 or 2 issues which they feel particularly related to, and to provide us with their perspectives concerning the specific problem. President Fernandez, do you want to start?
Sí, muchas gracias, profesor.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. I think some of the questions that have been asked are very much related with what Mr. Schwab mentioned as the center of the debate and in the fight against poverty. Going back to the issue about how to fight poverty and social inequity, I think that actually what we are putting forth is how to create wealth. Because if you don't create wealth, there is no way of solving poverty. That's the big dilemma of what can be a productive paradigm for Latin America. I think we've had a relatively successful model during the past 2 decades where Latin America has had an economic growth, although the prospects for poverty reduction Well, no doubt that extreme poverty has been reduced or curbed, and there has been a certain level of progress. If the idea is to generate wealth, in the second place, to formulate public policies aimed at a sustained economic growth, because in the end, you cannot reduce poverty when you grow 1 or 2 years and then you fall back again, and there is no sustainability in time. It is not sustained. The Chinese miracle is that 20 to 30 years, they grow above 8%. That is translated through time into social well-being. I think that economic growth through time is not sufficient to reduce the levels of poverty and social inequity that are lacked, in addition to the traditional policy that has to do with education, that has to do with health, that has to do with housing, with health, policies, sanitation, access to water supply, energy. Something recent in our country, something that was mentioned by President Uribe, social protection networks, the idea of the American welfare and the European welfare. Our benefactor state is the construction of those networks. So we didn't used to have transfer mechanisms to the families to ensure that people go to schools, welfare, the idea of the family bourse. But if you look at the problem we have in Dominican Republic, the transfer card for poor families, I have an integral vision that goes from the general view, some transparent policies. Corruption was mentioned. There has to be rule of law, democratic state, clear rules of the game that will guarantee transparency, make sure there is prevention and also penalization in case of committing crimes, the rule of law. All of this, if we integrate it, will render us a better Latin America, and we'll be able to fight better against poverty and social inequity. Bueno, muchas gracias. ¿Cuál es el comentario?
Yo coincido con el presidente.
I agree with President Fernandez, and I would like to mention the specific case of Guatemala. Its fight against impunity, the inequity, the neglect of previous administrations give rise to a very deep state of impunity that fosters an open corruption that will not try drug traffickers and that ignore all structures of the country. Guatemala has an international commission against corruption. It is the only government that has that. In 2 years of administration, there is a former president in jail. There are 2 very well-known families that are being tried by justice. A series of efforts are being done. Comments are being stated independent to the government. Besides that, the fight against corruption must be as serious as that against drug traffickers and other mafias in a country that was for a long time neglected as far as justice and security. In reducing poverty involves much work, but it is an everyday work. We hope to be able to make better in order to have all these justice projects advance and consolidate. I think that corruption, tax evasion, drug trafficking, all of this grew very much in Guatemala, at least in the 8 years prior to my administration. I'm not saying anything about military expenditures. Peace was signed in Guatemala in 1996. Fortunately, we haven't gone back to ideological confrontations, but the previous administration reduced the military. The agreements say and 3,493 soldiers, and they left us 1,000, and we're recovering those territories. So I think the fight against impunity is of utmost importance for the consolidation of businesses, security, education, and so forth. So I think that the fight against impunity is an effective tool to consolidate positive processes for a country.
President Lugo, thank you very much. I think that we must dwell on some very important issues raised here. You know that Paraguay is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and that would prove very hurtful to us whenever we traveled abroad. However, I did realize that corruption is not an issue that affects public office only. And I believe that there is an issue here that we are touching in passing only. I think that we have to engage in a healthy, candid dialogue about the new role of the state. I think that is one of the pending issues. I am convinced that we have gone from a minimum state to the demand and requirements that the state is fully responsible. That is at least the impression we have in Paraguay. The 90 well, we saw that the state's operation was tried to be reduced to the minimum, and I think that the time has come to recover the new role of the state, as President of Panama said, and not an absolute state. No one agrees with an absolute state. And here comes the issue I wanted to raise, and it has to do with public-private partnerships. I am convinced that the state on its own cannot give and find efficient response to the long list of social demands that we have had in our country, and that private initiative cannot do it on its own either. So it is inextricably important to conscientiously look for, to responsibly look for this private-public partnering. And we are trying this in Paraguay. I know that there are experiences in other countries where these public-private partnerships have proven very successful. We know that private capital is shy. It requires certain legal guarantees as well as ethical guarantees on the part of the state of the country that is to receive foreign investment. I think that the PPP is the key that would become a valid tool so that the state can take on a new role, as could private enterprise. I think that the conflict arises when the state wants to take on the role of private initiative and private capital wants to take on the role of the state. I believe that this is a very interesting discussion, a very valid one as well, where where common control of these initiatives could significantly improve the effectiveness of management. I believe that the corporate social responsibility, and I know that there are many entrepreneurs here, this is an issue that you've been working on, and we have to acknowledge that work and acknowledge that many companies in Latin America have been very successful, and I would like to recognize them all. However, there are other companies that have not yet taken that step. And we can also say that there are inefficient, ineffective states. In Paraguay, we have institutions that are unable to respond to these social demands that have been around for years. So yes, that is why I am convinced that this private-public partnership is the road that we must take and work to make sure that we find the best response to those social demands that have been postponed for decades, social demands that were built on the exclusion of so many people. I believe that an equitable society, that a fairer society, more solidary, more brotherly, must be based on these public-private partnerings where the role of the state won't be the role of a state that wants to control everything, but rather wants to regulate and participate, valuing and assuring the private initiative that we must admit has a very important social role to play in Latin America.
President Martinelli, short comment on complex issues.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to respond to the American wife of the senator-elect from Colombia. We have great ties with the U.S., and the thing is, the U.S. have forgotten us. It's not that we've forgotten them. And the mechanics of domestic U.S. policy that has other priorities has always forgotten its little brother who is in the backyard. And that's like when you have a party and you run into someone that should have gone to your party and didn't show up, and you ask him, hey, why didn't you come? And he answers, because you didn't invite me. But I thought you were coming anyway. I thought you knew of my party. I think that we in Latin America must also adopt a more proactive policy vis-à-vis the United States, and not just along the lines of, sending a good ambassador to the U.S. Who knows how the Americans operate and who can do lobbying, because it seems that lobbying is the only thing that moves the American state to do X, Y, or Z thing. And I'd like to say that I fail to understand why a country as progressive as Brazil that has such a high tax on broadband. I'm sure that at the next meeting that brings together presidents, I'm sure that all those here president are going to comment this to President Lula. And I'm sure that President Lula is going to act quickly and effectively to reduce broadband taxes in Brazil. I don't understand the arms race that some countries have engaged on, and I see that, some are quite enthused for that. But in Panama, having an open policy, having a policy whereby we have very few patrol boats and helicopters may have been a mistake, because we find ourselves in a vulnerable position vis-à-vis the problem of drug trafficking that's been hitting us so hard throughout the region. Money laundering, the drug routes are something that are creating many problems to us in Panama, because now we have a lot of people from Somalia, from Nepal, who aren't going to our country. They're on their way to the United States. And the States doesn't even help us to combat drug trafficking efficiently. They don't provide sufficient resources, and all those drugs are on their way to the United States. And what does stay behind is what leads our countries to have such a high degree of insecurity, so much kidnapping, homicides, assassination, thefts, as a result of the drugs that stays in each of our countries and doesn't find its way to the U.S., because it is increasingly difficult now to launder money given all the restrictions that our countries have implemented on cash deposits. The arms race, whoever is spending money in an arms race in a continent that is not used to war, because wars are things of the past. The only thing I dare think is that those are arms for repressing its own people. And personally, I fail to see any obvious end or purpose, because no one is going to attack anybody else here. We may have tension amongst ourselves, but as soon as there is a war between two sister nations, you can be sure that all those here present, all the presidents, are going to be there to avoid a single more shot from being fired. Not one more shot will be fired. Now, regarding corruption, I believe that corruption is endemic in our systems. And the best example must be set by the President of the Republic. If the president pays taxes, everybody has to pay taxes. If the president works, everyone has to work. If the president is a person combating corruption, who is corruption-free and does not engage in corruption, then fellow citizens will see that if the president doesn't do it, why should I? Because in many of our countries, in Panama, that's a very small country, lots of people are used to setting a price on the presidential chair. We have a party-based system that has led political parties and their leaders to give a certain amount of money that allows them to become impune. Contraband, smuggling is a very serious problem. Another of the serious problems we have is that we do have transparency laws, but we are not sufficiently transparent to post on the web all of our spending and expenses. I mean, bid processes. I see that all the countries post their tenders and bids on the web. So what I believe that all rulers should do, besides setting an example, is to seek out those responsible for corruption and putting them behind bars, and to indict them and try them. In Panama, we also have a president that was all-powerful who is currently behind bars, and this is unseen, unprecedented. We have several ministers of state under similar situations, and we left Palacén not because we don't believe in integration, but because our Palacén deputy members were looking for immunity. Now we are reformulating, restating our coming into Palacén in a different manner, so that the current deputy members be the ones who got the votes, who receive the people, are there for the people instead of for wanting to import liquor, car, or achieving some degree of impunity or immunity from being indicted, impeached, or tried. I think that we all have set as a priority combating corruption, and if the head of a country is corrupt, then the arms and legs and rest of the body can do as it pleases. Regarding public-private partnerships, I believe they are extremely important because they are a quick, effective, and efficient means for achieving the required marriage between a state that seems all-powerful, absolutist, and a private enterprise, looking all for common good. Because in a company, when one invests, one is looking for shareholder profits and one's own profit. When you invest in a state, you are fighting for the common good of all your citizens. And at the end, it translates into the same thing. So yes, I believe that public-private partnerships must be incentivated in all of our countries so that we can embark on works and projects that will translate into great benefits for all the citizens of all our countries. Thank you.
President Martinelli. President Uribe, you have the last word, and I would turn it around, let's say I would change the pattern. And since it's your last word to the audience here, my question is if you could just express 3 wishes. We have heard a lot about the issues of Latin America. You have here in front of you over 500 representatives of business. What are your wishes? What would you expect from the people here going home that they keep in mind out of this meeting here?
Gracias, Professor Schwab.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. Colombia should have strengthened its armed forces extensively in recent years in order to fulfill its duty to strengthen democratic security. And one thing is combating these internal security phenomena, and the arms race is a very different thing. Just like we have decidedly combated narco-terrorism, we are also decided and intent on not joining the arms race. And what worries us very, very much is that mistakes are made, because there are countries who get into this arms race and overlook their internal domestic security problems. And what is the relationship between insecurity and corruption? When one does not deal with this lack of security, all criminal factors acquire the power that allows them to penetrate, to permeate the state and communities alike. So, crime in an environment of impunity is a crime that has a great corrupting capacity and to actually the community. That is why we are convinced that it's important to underline the relationship between combating crime and its twin sister, which is combating corruption. Naturally, in this war on corruption, there's a very important role, and that is citizen participation. Citizen participation is tied to our ability to progress in the area of connectivity. Because when one looks at the 1,000-year history of the rule of law, one sees the following. In that evolution, we have seen that controls have been set, government and state bodies to exert control. They said that taxes can only be established by parliament. It was also said that we need an independent state body for disciplinary control. We need a state body for fiscal control. We need judges, we need criminal codes, the courts, so on and so forth. But yes, all that is important, but what is most important is a high degree of citizen participation. To the extent that citizens participate, that they voice their opinions, there will be trust, transparency, the ability to denounce corruption. There will be a moral sanction, a political sanction, and we will contain corruption in that manner. And that citizen participation requires going hand in hand with connectivity. For example, citizen participation is impossible if we don't progress in e-government. E-government requires connectivity. The things we have fostered in Colombia include that in Colombia, before opening a bid for a public contract, we disseminate the preliminary terms of condition to avoid corruption in the terms of reference. And that interaction with the citizens has to be done through connectivity, through the web, online. We have some very important tools to encourage such investment. Any investment in that sector will receive a 30% tax deduction that can be made effective at any time by the constituent. And that also allows me to present one of the many examples that Colombia has to show regarding private-public participation and partnering, and that has been achieved through connectivity. We have set a tax that nurtures the communications fund, and thanks to that tax, we can assure giving connectivity to the poorest sectors, the poor schools, to public offices, to public hospitals. And there we have a fantastic public-private partnership in this specific area that has proven very helpful to make progress in the area of connectivity and in combating corruption. And I cannot refrain from mentioning the U.S. I think that whenever one thinks of the unity of the Americas without the U.S. is a big mistake. I believe that the different regional institutions that want to unite the Americas cannot be institutions that are created against the U.S. or against Canada. Because at the end of the day, we must all find the road that will bring us to unity. And Colombia has a very important partnership with the U.S. in the war on drugs and narco-terrorism. And it is before these respectful presidents of our sister nations that I want to repeat that in this long and difficult war, Colombia has never been an offensive country, nor have we ever offended any of our sister nations. We, together with the U.S., combat narco-terrorism, and we combat it because Colombian society is entitled to rid itself of this historical scourge verge. And we do so with full respect of our sister nations. What we would like our sister nations is to help us fight this phenomenon. Because let me say the following in 30 seconds. We in the past used to say, yes, we produce, but in the north they use drugs. No, Colombia has lived the process. Colombia started by saying this is a transit country, and that's why some money is left here. Here we're not going to produce, and then we had 5,000 hectares of illegal crops. Now we're producing but very little, and we ended up with 400,000 hectares of illegal crops, and then we said, yes, we produce, but we don't use drugs. Excuse me, now we have 1 million drug users, which means that all of our countries are on the verge of running that risk of narco-terrorism in all its facets, in all its stages, the production, the trafficking, and consumption. And that is why any alliance like the one we have, like the US, could hopefully be replicated throughout the continent. What can I ask you? It's so difficult because I've asked so much. Please be the ambassadors of Colombia. Help us consider Colombia as a top priority in that screen of destinations, and let us demand everywhere respect for democratic values. That would be a simple request that comes from the bottom of my heart, Professor Schwab.
Thank you, President Uribe. Thank you, fellow presidents. I think it was a discussion which touched upon all the issues which were in our mind. The public-private partnership and the social responsibility, social entrepreneurship are key issues very close to the heart of the World Economic Forum. And it has become a tradition that when we have this presidential panel, we always include, we want to walk the talk, and we include also honoring some social entrepreneurs. So if I may ask you to remain seated for 5 to 10 minutes, and we will honor some outstanding social entrepreneurs. We are working together also with IDP in order to select among hundreds of nominations some very, I would say, role model examples. And I may ask Hilde Schwab, who is the chair of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, to present to us the Social Entrepreneurs of the Year, so the Latin American Social Entrepreneurs of the Year, 2010.
Thank you for this introduction, Klaus. What the social entrepreneurs are doing relates very much to the earlier discussion on this stage. They work in their daily life to help the poor and to reduce inequality. President Uribe, Presidents, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this award ceremony, and I would like to extend a special welcome to the social entrepreneurs from Colombia, but also from all the other countries where they have come from for this special day. The Schwab Foundation was created 10 years ago by my husband Klaus and myself with the objective to search for individuals around the world who have creative, sustainable solutions for the many problems we face, and who by this doing are enhancing human dignity through social innovation and serving as role models for entrepreneurial young people. Through a selection process organized in now more than 20 countries and 5 regions, we have established a network of 170 of the most outstanding social entrepreneurs. Their organizations are working in areas such as healthcare, education, agriculture, microfinance, waste management, water and sanitation, environment protection. They are able to improve the lives of millions of people. I would like to take this occasion also to thank our partner organizations who help us find these great role models in these regions, but also around the world, especially the Inter-American Development Bank, Boston Consulting Group, Ernst & Young, and Folha de Sao Paulo. This ceremony is dedicated to highlight those social entrepreneurs that have led social change and have a concrete impact in Latin America for the last years, if not decades. Yet they have remained largely unknown. Most of them are working across the borders and will be recognized as regional social entrepreneurs. The Schwab Foundation serves as a platform to integrate them into a community of expertise and experience exchange, and to give them access through the World Economic Forum to the political and business network. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the winners to you. May I ask Vladimir Delagneau to come up to stage. Vladimir Delagneau is the founder of Tecnosul, Nicaragua. In rural Nicaragua, more than 50% of the population lacks access to electricity. After experiencing life in a remote village without electricity for 2 years during civil war, Vladimir Delagneau decided to start Tecnosul and provide alternative energy solutions. Tecnosol has installed more than 50,000 photovoltaic systems, including lighting, water pumping, and refrigeration systems. Tecnosol expanded to El Salvador and is considering other countries in Central America. Congratulations for this award. David Gauss, founder of Andean Health and Development, Ecuador. May I ask you to join me, please? David Gauss is the founder of Andean Health and Development. He came first to Ecuador about 20 years ago as an accountant. Seeing that the biggest need was access to hospital care in the rural areas, he trained to become a doctor. Andean Health and Development currently runs 2 financially full self-sustainable hospitals in rural towns in Ecuador and is opening a 3rd one. In addition, the organization trains doctors and nurses that are committed to remaining in the countryside. Congratulations for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anne Hastings and Father Joseph Philip. Foncose is the name of the organization, from Haiti. Foncose is Haiti's largest microfinance institution with 41 branches located across the entire country. Foncose seeks to empower rural Haitians to build and diversify their income, learn new skills, and enable also the poorest in Haiti to gradually find a way out of poverty. Foncose provides savings, loans, and remittance services, as well as business and health training. Currently, Foncose serves more than 47,000 women borrowers and 200,000 savers. Father Philip will provide more information this afternoon in the session about Haiti. Congratulations to you both. Susana and Claudio Padua. They are the founders of Instituto de Pesquisa Ecológicas, and they have been distinguished as social entrepreneurs of Brazil. Susanna and Claudio Padua gave up their professions as a designer and a businessman to dedicate themselves to the conservation of Brazil's rich biodiversity. IPE runs a wide range of activities, including research of endangered species, professional training in conservation biology. They partner with companies to pursue projects that encourage sustainable alternatives for income generation of communities living near protected areas. Congratulations. Thank you very much for having been with us for this very important award for the people who work relentlessly all day long to improve people's lives. Thank you.
May I ask them to a photo? Before assembling for a group photo here with the social entrepreneurs and the presidents, I just would like to stress again how important it is to have such courageous people devoting their lives in a practical way to bring social innovation to the many problems which we discussed. I would like to thank again the presidents for having participated and come to us. I think it was a most valuable discussion, and I would like to thank particularly President Uribe for because we don't see you anymore here this afternoon, for the great hospitality and the support and cooperation which we had in organizing this meeting. And now, let's do a group photo, please.
For work that will return dignity to people, to society. You see that a lazy society, a society that doesn't have a purpose, can be a bomb. As a professor, you had an opportunity to work in Germany, where there is a concern for people. There is a concern when we create a society that is idle, without opportunities, without a profession, without skills. I think that's the key that we should continue to work on. And also the question, let's not have this as a declaration, as a statement, and as a speech. Let's make an effort for our universities to have good level universities. How we Paraguayans can go to school. If we had a chance to go to school abroad, those that went to school in Europe, there is a big difference. That's why education is key, but also education for work that will return people their dignity, opportunities, so they won't have a chance to beg, because the idea is not to create a society of beggars, but a society that can provide equal opportunities, create a more equitable society. And we politicians have to strengthen our weak, fragile democracies. We have a historical moment to construct, to build more democratic, just, and opportunistic societies. Bueno, quisiéramos detener.
So much to ask questions, but to make a very short comment in terms of what you have heard. And I will take 3 or 4 comments, and afterwards I may ask the presidents to react on 1 or 2 of those comments. Anybody who would like to raise? Yes, please.
Luis Furlan from Brazil. Voy a hablar en español mejor.
I'll speak in English. Portuñol. In countries, the access to a broadband is a big expense. They charge 20% and they use 42%. tax for the use of the broadband. Wouldn't be a good path to eliminate taxes on connectivity through the broadband? Vamos a recibir otro comentario.
Who has the microphones? Yeah, okay.
Father Joseph Philip from Haiti.
Joseph.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think the empowerment of the young people is the key to fight against poverty in Latin America.
Thank you. Some other comments? Here also were some comments.
¿Comentarios? Por favor, le pueden pasar un micrófono a
Stephen Donahue, de McClarty Associates in Washington. Quisiera comentar sobre
Washington. I want to comment on the diversion of resources that are going to militarism and the purchase of unnecessary military equipment for the region. And if you have a chance to explain what that means as far as having the necessary resources to have the same education, health reforms, and the things that really have a true impact on the lives of people in the region.
Comment here, or two actually.
Luis Javier Castro, presidente de la Red Central.
I am the chairman of the Central American Network in favor of social responsibility. Thank you for your comments. I want to ask you, what are you doing in your countries to promote public and private alliances to improve the social situation? Juan Quiroz in Brazil. My question is how to fight in our Latin American governments against corruption. How many funds are lost, wasted, with administrations or governments that are not corrupt, but also where there are corrupt officials, where there's no clear transparency on how resources are allocated or used. Much corruption to avoid an important mass of resources to get out of the circuit and not to be received by society.
Senator-elect. I noticed that no one really spoke very much about the role that the United States should or should not play in the integration in Latin America, and I'm just concerned, I'm wondering if in some way the United States has failed its southern brothers and sisters.
There's quite an array of questions, and I don't expect, or we don't expect from each of the presidents to respond to all of those issues. So may I ask the presidents to pick one or two issues which they feel particularly related to, and to provide us with their perspectives concerning the specific problem. President Fernandez, do you want to start?
Sí, muchas gracias, profesor.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. I think some of the questions that have been asked are very much related with what Mr. Schwab mentioned as the center of the debate and in the fight against poverty. Going back to the issue about how to fight poverty and social inequity, I think that actually what we are putting forth is how to create wealth. Because if you don't create wealth, there is no way of solving poverty. That's the big dilemma of what can be a productive paradigm for Latin America. I think we've had a relatively successful model during the past 2 decades where Latin America has had an economic growth. Although the prospects for poverty reduction, well, no doubt that extreme poverty has been reduced or curbed, and there has been a certain level of progress. If the idea is to generate wealth, in the second place, to formulate public policies aimed at a sustained economic growth, because in the end, you cannot reduce poverty when you grow 1 or 2 years and then you fall back again, and there is no sustainability in time. It is not sustained. The Chinese miracle is that 20 to 30 years, they grow above 8%. That is translated through time into social well-being. I think that economic growth through time is not sufficient to reduce the levels of poverty and social inequity that are lacked, in addition to the traditional policy that has to do with education, that has to do with health, that has to do with housing, with health, policies, sanitation, access to water supply, energy. Something recent in our country, something that was mentioned by President Uribe, social protection networks, the idea of the American welfare and the European welfare. Our benefactor state is the construction of those networks. So we didn't used to have transfer mechanisms to the families to ensure that people go to schools, welfare, the idea of the family bourse. But if you look at the problem we have in Dominican Republic, the transfer card for poor families, I have an integral vision that goes from the general view, some transparent policies. Corruption was mentioned. There has to be rule of law, democratic state, clear rules of the game that will guarantee transparency, make sure there is prevention and also penalization in case of committing crimes, the rule of law. All of this, if we integrate it, will render us a better Latin America and we'll be able to fight better against poverty and social inequity. Bueno, muchas gracias. ¿Cuál es el comentario?
Yo coincido con el presidente.
I agree with President Fernandez, and I would like to mention the specific case of Guatemala. Its fight against impunity, the inequity, the neglect of previous administrations give rise to a very deep state of impunity that fosters an open corruption that will not try drug traffickers and that ignore all structures of the country. Guatemala has an international commission against corruption. It is the only government that has that. In 2 years of administration, there is a former president in jail. There are 2 very well-known families that are being tried by justice. A series of efforts are being done. Comments are being stated independent to the government. Besides that, the fight against corruption must be as serious as that against drug traffickers and other mafias in a country that was for a long time neglected as far as justice and security. In reducing poverty involves much work, but it is an everyday work. We hope to be able to make better in order to have all these justice projects advance and consolidate. I think that corruption, tax evasion, drug trafficking, all of this grew very much in Guatemala, at least in the 8 years prior to my administration. I'm not saying anything about military expenditures. Peace was signed in Guatemala in 1996. Fortunately, we haven't gone back to ideological confrontations, but the previous administration reduced the military, the agreements say, in 3,493 soldiers, and they left us 1,000, and we're recovering those territories. So I think the fight against impunity is of utmost importance for the consolidation of businesses, security, education, and so forth. So I think that the fight against impunity is an effective tool to consolidate positive processes for a country.
President Lugo, thank you very much. I think that we must dwell on some very important issues raised here. You know that Paraguay is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, and that would prove very hurtful to us whenever we traveled abroad. However, I did realize that corruption is not an issue that affects public office only. And I believe that there is an issue here that we are touching in passing only. I think that we have to engage in a healthy, candid dialogue about the new role of the state. I think that is one of the pending issues. I am convinced that we have gone from a minimum state to the demand and requirements that the state is fully responsible. That is at least the impression we have in Paraguay. The 90 well, we saw that the state's operation was tried to be reduced to the minimum, and I think that the time has come to recover the new role of the state, as President of Panama said, and not an absolute state. No one agrees with an absolute state. And here comes the issue I wanted to raise, and it has to do with public-private partnerships. I am convinced that the state on its own cannot give and find efficient response to the long list of social demands that we have had in our country, and that private initiative cannot do it on its own either. So it is inextricably important to conscientiously look for, to responsibly look for this private-public partnering. And we are trying this in Paraguay. I know that there are experiences in other countries where these public-private partnerships have proven very successful. We know that private capital is shy. It requires certain legal guarantees as well as ethical guarantees on the part of the state of the country that is to receive foreign investment. I think that the PPP is the key that would become a valid tool so that the state can take on a new role, as could private enterprise. I think that the conflict arises when the state wants to take on the role of private initiative and private capital wants to take on the role of the state. I believe that this is a very interesting discussion, a very valid one as well, where where common control of these initiatives could significantly improve the effectiveness of management. I believe that the corporate social responsibility, and I know that there are many entrepreneurs here, this is an issue that you've been working on, and we have to acknowledge that work and acknowledge that many companies in Latin America have been very successful, and I would like to recognize them all. However, there are other companies that have not yet taken that step. And we can also say that there are inefficient, ineffective states. In Paraguay, we have institutions that are unable to respond to the social demands that have been around for years. So yes, that is why I am convinced that this private-public partnership is the road that we must take and work to make sure that we find the best response to those social demands that have been postponed for decades, social demands that were built on the exclusion of so many people. I believe that an equitable society, that a fairer society, more solidary, more brotherly, must be based on these public-private partnerings where the role of the state won't be the role of a state that wants to control everything, but rather wants to regulate and participate, valuing and assuring the private initiative that we must admit has a very important social role to play in Latin America.
President Martinelli, short comment on complex issues.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to respond to the American wife of the senator-elect from Colombia. We have great ties with the U.S., and the thing is, the U.S. have forgotten us. It's not that we've forgotten them. And the mechanics of domestic U.S. policy that has other priorities has always forgotten its little brother who is in the backyard. And that's like when you have a party and you run into someone that should have gone to your party and didn't show up, and you ask him, hey, why didn't you come? And he answers, because you didn't invite me. But I thought you were coming anyway. I thought you knew of my party. I think that we in Latin America must also adopt a more proactive policy vis-a-vis the United States, and not just along the lines of, sending a good ambassador to the U.S. who knows how the Americans operate and who can do lobbying, because it seems that lobbying is the only thing that moves the American state to do X, Y, or Z thing. And I'd like to say that I fail to understand why a country as progressive as Brazil that has such a high tax on broadband. I'm sure that at the next meeting that brings together presidents, I'm sure that all those here president are going to comment this to President Lula. And I'm sure that President Lula is going to act quickly and effectively to reduce broadband taxes in Brazil. I don't understand the arms race that some countries have engaged on, and I see that, some are quite enthused for that. But in Panama, having an open policy, having a policy whereby we have very few patrol boats and helicopters may have been a mistake, because we find ourselves in a very vulnerable position vis-a-vis the problem of drug trafficking that's been hitting us so hard throughout the region. Money laundering, the drug routes are something that are creating many problems to us in Panama, because now we have a lot of people from Somalia, from Nepal, who aren't going to our country. They're on their way to the United States. And the States says it doesn't even help us to combat drug trafficking efficiently. They don't provide sufficient resources, and all those drugs are on their way to the United States. And what does stay behind is what leads our countries to have such a high degree of insecurity, so much kidnapping, homicide, assassination, theft, as a result of the drugs that stays in each of our countries and doesn't find its way to the U.S. because it is increasingly difficult now to launder money given all the restrictions that our countries have implemented on cash deposits. The arms race, whoever is spending money in an arms race in a continent that is not used to war, because wars are things of the past. The only thing I dare think is that those are arms for repressing its own people. And personally, I fail to see any obvious end or purpose, because no one is going to attack anybody else here. We may have tension amongst ourselves, but as soon as there is a war between two sister nations, you can be sure that all those here present, all the presidents, are going to be there to avoid a single more shot from being fired. Not one more shot will be fired. Now, regarding corruption, I believe that corruption is endemic in our systems. And the best example must be set by the President of the Republic. If the president pays taxes, everybody has to pay taxes. If the president works, everyone has to work. If the president is a person combating corruption, who is corruption-free and does not engage in corruption, then fellow citizens will see that if the president doesn't do it, why should I? Because in many of our countries, in Panama, that's a very small country, lots of people are used to setting a price on the presidential chair. We have a party-based system that has led political parties and their leaders to give a certain amount of money that allows them to become impugn contraband. Smuggling is a very serious problem. Another of the serious problems we have is that we do have transparency laws, but we are not sufficiently transparent to post on the web all of our spending and expenses. I mean, bid processes. I see that all the countries post their tenders and bids on the web. So what I believe that all rulers should do, besides setting an example, is to seek out those responsible for corruption and putting them behind bars, and to indict them and try them. In Panama, we also have a president that was all-powerful who is currently behind bars, and this is unseen, unprecedented. We have several ministers of state under similar situations, and we left Palacen not because we don't believe in integration, but because our Palacen deputy members were looking for immunity. Now we are reformulating, restating our coming into Palacen in a different manner, so that the current deputy members be the ones who got the votes, who receive the people, are there for the people instead of for wanting to import liquor, car, or achieving some degree of impunity or immunity from being indicted, impeached, or tried. I think that we all have set as a priority combating corruption, and if the head of a country is corrupt, then the arms and legs and rest of the body can do as it pleases. Regarding public-private partnerships, I believe they are extremely important because they are a quick, effective, and efficient means for achieving the required marriage between a state that seems all-powerful, absolutist, and a private enterprise, looking all for common good. Because in a company, when one invests, one is looking for shareholder profits and one's own profit. When you invest in a state, you are fighting for the common good of all your citizens. And at the end, it translates into the same thing. So yes, I believe that public-private partnerships must be incentivated in all of our countries so that we can embark on works and projects that will translate into great benefits for all the citizens of all our countries. Thank you.
President Martinelli. President Uribe, you have the last word, and I would turn it around, let's say I would change the pattern. And since it's your last word to the audience here, my question is, if you could just express 3 wishes. We have heard a lot about the issues of Latin America. You have here in front of you over 500 representatives of business. What are your wishes? What would you expect from the people here going home that they keep in mind out of this meeting here?
Gracias. Professor Schwab.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. Colombia should have strengthened its armed forces extensively in recent years in order to fulfill its duty to strengthen democratic security. And one thing is combating these internal security phenomena, and the arms race is a very different thing. Just like we have decidedly combated narco-terrorism, we are also decided and intent on not joining the arms race. And what worries us very, very much is that mistakes are made, because there are countries who get into this arms race and overlook their internal domestic security problems. And what is the relationship between insecurity and corruption? When one does not deal with this lack of security, all criminal factors acquire the power that allows them to penetrate, to permeate the state and communities alike. So, crime in an environment of impunity is a crime that has a great corrupting capacity, and to actually the community. That is why we are convinced that it's important to underline the relationship between combating crime and its twin sister, which is combating corruption. Naturally, In this war on corruption, there's a very important role, and that is citizen participation. Citizen participation is tied to our ability to progress in the area of connectivity. Because when one looks at the 1,000-year history of the rule of law, one sees the following. In that evolution, we have seen that controls have been set, government and state bodies to exert control. They said that taxes can only be established by parliament. It was also said that we need an independent state body for disciplinary control. We need a state body for fiscal control. We need judges, we need criminal codes, the courts, so on and so forth. But yes, all that is important, but what is most important is a high degree of citizen participation. To the extent that citizens participate, that they voice their opinions, there will be trust, transparency, the ability to denounce corruption. There will be a moral sanction, a political sanction, and we will contain corruption in that manner. And that citizen participation requires going hand in hand with connectivity. For example, citizen participation is impossible if we don't progress in e-government. E-government requires connectivity. The things we have fostered in Colombia include that in Colombia, before opening a bid for a public contract, we disseminate the preliminary terms of condition to avoid corruption in the terms of reference. And that interaction with the citizens has to be done through connectivity, through the web, online. We have some very important tools to encourage such investment. Any investment in that sector will receive a 30% tax deduction that can be made effective at any time by the constituent. And that also allows me to present one of the many examples that Colombia has to show regarding private-public participation and partnering, and that has been achieved through connectivity. We have set a tax that nurtures the communications fund, and thanks to that tax, we can assure giving connectivity to the poorest sectors, the poor schools, to public offices, to public hospitals. And there we have a fantastic public-private partnership in this specific area that has proven very helpful to make progress in the area of connectivity and in combating corruption. And I cannot refrain from mentioning the U.S. I think that whenever one thinks of the unity of the Americas without the U.S. is a big mistake. I believe that the different regional institutions that want to unite the Americas cannot be institutions that are created against the U.S. or against Canada. Because at the end of the day, we must all find the road that will bring us to unity. And Colombia has a very important partnership with the U.S. in the war on drugs and narco-terrorism. And it is before these respectful presidents of our sister nations that I want to repeat that in this long and difficult war, Colombia has never been an offensive country, nor have we ever offended any of our sister nations. We, together with the U.S., combat narco-terrorism, and we combat it because Colombian society is entitled to rid itself of this historical scourge. And we do so with full respect of our sister nations. What we would like our sister nations is to help us fight this phenomenon. Because let me say the following in 30 seconds. We in the past used to say, yes, we produce, but in the north they use drugs. No, Colombia has lived the process. Colombia started by saying this is a transit country, and that's why some money is left here. Here we're not going to produce. And then we had 5,000 hectares of illegal crops. Now we're producing, but very little. And we ended up with 400,000 hectares of illegal crops. And then we said, yes, we produce, but we don't use drugs. Excuse me, now we have 1 million drug users, which means that all of our countries are on the verge of running that risk of narco-terrorism in all its facets, in all its stages, the production, the trafficking, and consumption. And that is why any alliance like the one we have, like the U.S., could hopefully be replicated throughout the continent. What can I ask you? It's so difficult because I've asked so much. Please be the ambassadors of Colombia. Help us consider Colombia as a top priority in that screen of destinations, and let us demand everywhere respect for democratic values. That would be a simple request that comes from the bottom of my heart, Professor Schwab.
Thank you, President Uribe. Thank you, fellow presidents. I think it was a discussion which touched upon all the issues which were in our mind. The public-private partnership and the social responsibility, social entrepreneurship are key issues very close to the heart of the World Economic Forum. And it has become a tradition that when we have this presidential panel, we always include, we want to walk the talk, and we include also honoring some social entrepreneurs. So if I may ask you to remain seated for 5 to 10 minutes, and we will honor some outstanding social entrepreneurs. We are working together also with IDP in order to select among hundreds of nominations some very, I would say, role model examples. And I may ask Hilde Schwab, who is the chair of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, to present to us the Social Entrepreneurs of the Year, so the Latin American Social Entrepreneurs of the Year 2010.
Thank you for this introduction, Klaus. What the social entrepreneurs are doing relates very much to the earlier discussion on this stage. They work in their daily life to help the poor and to reduce inequality. President Uribe, Presidents, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this award ceremony, and I would like to extend a special welcome to the social entrepreneurs from Colombia, but also from all the other countries where they have come from for this special day. The Schwab Foundation was created 10 years ago by my husband Klaus and myself with the objective to search for individuals around the world who have creative, sustainable solutions for the many problems we face, and who by this doing are enhancing human dignity through social innovation and serving as role models for entrepreneurial young people. Through a selection process organized in now more than 20 countries and 5 regions, we have established a network of 170 of the most outstanding social entrepreneurs. Their organizations are working in areas such as healthcare, education, agriculture, microfinance, waste management, water and sanitation, environment protection. They are able to improve the lives of millions of people. I would like to take this occasion also to thank our partner organizations who help us find these great role models in these regions, but also around the world, especially the Inter-American Development Bank, Boston Consulting Group, Ernst & Young, and Folha de Sao Paulo. This ceremony is dedicated to highlight those social entrepreneurs that have led social change and have a concrete impact in Latin America for the last years, if not decades. Yet they have remained largely unknown. Most of them are working across the borders and will be recognized as regional social entrepreneurs. The Schwab Foundation serves as a platform to integrate them into a community of expertise and experience exchange, and to give them access through the World Economic Forum to the political and business network. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the winners to you. May I ask Vladimir Delagneau to come up to stage. Vladimir Renano is the founder of Tecnosol, Nicaragua. In rural Nicaragua, more than 50% of the population lacks access to electricity. After experiencing life in a remote village without electricity for 2 years during civil war, Vladimir Renano decided to start Tecnosol and provide alternative energy solutions. Tecnosol has installed more than 50,000 photovoltaic systems, including lighting, water pumping, and refrigeration systems. Tecnosol expanded to El Salvador and is considering other countries in Central America. Congratulations for this award. David Gauss, founder of Andean Health and Development, Ecuador. May I ask you to join me upstairs? David Gauss is the founder of Andean Health and Development. He came first to Ecuador about 20 years ago as an accountant. Seeing that the biggest need was access to hospital care in the rural areas, he trained to become a doctor. Andean Health and Development currently runs 2 financially full self-sustainable hospitals in rural towns in Ecuador and is opening a 3rd one. In addition, the organization trains doctors and nurses that are committed to remaining in the countryside. Congratulations for your work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anne Hastings and Father Joseph Philip. Foncose is the name of the organization, from Haiti. Foncose is Haiti's largest microfinance institution with 41 branches located across the entire country. Foncose seeks to empower rural Haitians to build and diversify their income, learn new skills, and enable also the poorest in Haiti to gradually find a way out of poverty. Foncose provides savings, loans, and remittance services, as well as business and health training. Currently, Foncose serves more than 47,000 women borrowers and 200,000 savers. Father Philip will provide more information this afternoon in the session about Haiti. Congratulations to you both. Susana and Claudio Padua. They are the founders of Instituto de Pesquisa Ecológicas, and they have been distinguished as social entrepreneurs of Brazil. Susana and Claudio Padua gave up their professions as a designer and a businessman to dedicate themselves to the conservation of Brazil's rich biodiversity. IPE runs a wide range of activities, including research of endangered species, professional training in conservation biology. They partner with companies to pursue projects that encourage sustainable alternatives for income generation of communities living near protected areas. Congratulations. Thank you very much for having been with us for this very important award for the people who work relentlessly all day long to improve people's lives. Thank you.
May I ask them to a photo? Before assembling for a group photo here with the social entrepreneurs and the presidents, I just would like to stress again how important it is to have such courageous people devoting their lives in a practical way to bring social innovation to the many problems which we discussed. I would like to thank again the presidents for having participated and come to us. I think it was a most valuable discussion, and I would like to thank particularly President Uribe for because we don't see you anymore here this afternoon, for the great hospitality and the support and cooperation which we had in organizing this meeting. And now, let's do a group photo, please.
The community, that is why we are convinced that it's important to underline the relationship between combating crime and its twin sister, which is combating corruption. Naturally, in this war on corruption, there's a very important role, and that is citizen participation. Citizen participation is tied to our ability to progress in the area of connectivity. Because when one looks at the 1,000-year history of the rule of law, one sees the following. In that evolution, we have seen that controls have been set, government and state bodies to exert control. They said that taxes can only be established by parliament. It was also said that we need an independent state body for disciplinary control. We need a state body for fiscal control. We need judges, we need criminal codes, the courts, so on and so forth. But yes, all that is important, but what is most important is a high degree of citizen participation. To the extent that citizens participate, that they voice their opinions, there will be trust, transparency, the ability to denounce corruption. There will be a moral sanction, a political sanction, and we will contain corruption in that manner. And that citizen participation requires going hand in hand with connectivity. For example, citizen participation is impossible if we don't progress in e-government. E-government requires connectivity. The things we have fostered in Colombia include that in Colombia, before opening a bid for a public contract, we disseminate the preliminary terms of condition to avoid corruption in the terms of reference. And that interaction with the citizens has to be done through connectivity, through the web, online. We have some very important tools to encourage such investment. Any investment in that sector will receive a 30% tax deduction that can be made effective at any time by the constituent. And that also allows me to present one of the many examples that Colombia has to show regarding private-public participation and partnering, and that has been achieved through connectivity. We have set a tax that nurtures the communications fund, and thanks to that tax, we can assure giving connectivity to the poorest sectors, the poor schools, to public offices, to public hospitals. And there we have a fantastic public-private partnership in this specific area that has proven very helpful to make progress in the area of connectivity and in combating corruption. And I cannot refrain from mentioning the U.S. I think that whenever one thinks of the unity of the Americas without the U.S. is a big mistake. I believe that the different regional institutions that want to unite the Americas cannot be institutions that are created against the U.S. or against Canada. Because at the end of the day, we must all find the road that will bring us to unity. And Colombia has a very important partnership with the U.S. in the war on drugs and narco-terrorism. And it is before these respectful presidents of our sister nations that I want to repeat that in this long and difficult war, Colombia has never been an offensive country, nor have we ever offended any of our sister nations. We, together with the U.S., combat narco-terrorism, and we combat it because Colombian society is entitled to rid itself of this historical scourge verge. And we do so with full respect of our sister nations. What we would like our sister nations is to help us fight this phenomenon. Because let me say the following in 30 seconds. We in the past used to say, yes, we produce, but in the north they use drugs. No, Colombia has lived the process. Colombia started by saying this is a transit country, and that's why some money is left here. Here we're not going to produce. And then we had 5,000 hectares of illegal crops. Now we're producing but very little. And we ended up with 400,000 hectares of illegal crops. And then we said, yes, we produce, but we don't use drugs. Excuse me, now we have 1 million drug users, which means that all of our countries are on the verge of running that risk of narco-terrorism in all its facets, in all its stages, the production, the trafficking, and consumption. And that is why any alliance like the one we have, like the US, could hopefully be replicated throughout the continent. What can I ask you? It's so difficult because I've asked so much. Please be the ambassadors of Colombia. Help us consider Colombia as a top priority in that screen of destinations, and let us demand everywhere respect for democratic values. That would be a simple request that comes from the bottom of my heart, Professor Schwab.
Thank you, President Uribe. Thank you, fellow presidents. I think it was a discussion which touched upon all the issues which were in our mind. The public-private partnership and the social responsibility, social entrepreneurship are key issues very close to the heart of the World Economic Forum. And it has become a tradition that when we have this presidential panel, we always include, we want to walk the talk, and we include also honoring some social entrepreneurs. So if I may ask you to remain seated for 5 to 10 minutes, and we will honor some outstanding social entrepreneurs. We are working together also with IDP in order to select among hundreds of nominations some very, I would say, role model examples. And I may ask Hilde Schwab, who is the chair of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, to present to us the social entrepreneurs of the year, so the Latin American social entrepreneurs of the year 2010.
Thank you for this introduction, Klaus. What the social entrepreneurs are doing relates very much to the earlier discussion on this stage. They work in their daily life to help the poor and to reduce inequality. President Uribe, Presidents, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this award ceremony, and I would like to extend a special welcome to the social entrepreneurs from Colombia, but also from all the other countries where they have come from for this special day. The Schwab Foundation was created 10 years ago by my husband Klaus and myself with the objective to search for individuals around the world who have creative, sustainable solutions for the many problems we face, and who by this doing are enhancing human dignity through social innovation and serving as role models for entrepreneurial young people. Through a selection process organized in now more than 20 countries and 5 regions, we have established a network of 170 of the most outstanding social entrepreneurs. Their organizations are working in areas such as healthcare, education, agriculture, microfinance, waste management, water and sanitation, environment protection. They are able to improve the lives of millions of people. I would like to take this occasion also to thank our partner organizations who help us find these great role models in these regions, but also around the world, especially the Inter-American Development Bank, Boston Consulting Group, Ernst & Young, and Folha de Sao Paulo. This ceremony is dedicated to highlight those social entrepreneurs that have led social change and have a concrete impact in Latin America for the last years, if not decades. Yet they have remained largely unknown. Most of them are working across the borders and will be recognized as regional social entrepreneurs. The Schwab Foundation serves as a platform to integrate them into a community of expertise and experience exchange, and to give them access through the World Economic Forum to the political and business network. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the winners to you. May I ask Vladimir Delagneau to come up to stage. Vladimir Delagneau is the founder of Tecnosul, Nicaragua. In rural Nicaragua, more than 50% of the population lacks access to electricity. After experiencing life in a remote village without electricity for 2 years during civil war, Vladimir Delagneau decided to start Tecnosul and provide alternative energy solutions. Tecnosol has installed more than 50,000 photovoltaic systems, including lighting, water pumping, and refrigeration systems. Tecnosol expanded to El Salvador and is considering other countries in Central America. Congratulations for this award. David Gauss, founder of Andean Health and Development, Ecuador. May I ask you to join me, please? David Gauss is the founder of Andean Health and Development. He came first to Ecuador about 20 years ago as an accountant. Seeing that the biggest need was access to hospital care in the rural areas, he trained to become a doctor. Andean Health and Development currently runs 2 financially full self-sustainable hospitals in rural towns in Ecuador and is opening a 3rd one. In addition, the organization trains doctors and nurses that are committed to remaining in the countryside. Congratulations for your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anne Hastings and Father Joseph Philip. Foncose is the name of the organization, from Haiti. Foncose is Haiti's largest microfinance institution with 41 branches located across the entire country. Foncose seeks to empower rural Haitians to build and diversify their income, learn new skills, and enable also the poorest in Haiti to gradually find a way out of poverty. Foncose provides savings, loans, and remittance services, as well as business and health training. Currently, Foncose serves more than 47,000 women borrowers and 200,000 savers. Father Philip will provide more information this afternoon in the session about Haiti. Congratulations to you both. Susana and Claudio Padua. They are the founders of Instituto de Pesquisa Ecológicas, and they have been distinguished as social entrepreneurs of Brazil. Susana and Claudio Padua gave up their professions as a designer and a businessman to dedicate themselves to the conservation of Brazil's rich biodiversity. IPE runs a wide range of activities, including research of endangered species, professional training in conservation biology. They partner with companies to pursue projects that encourage sustainable alternatives for income generation of communities living near protected areas. Congratulations. Thank you very much for having been with us for this very important award for the people who work relentlessly all day long to improve people's lives. Thank you.
May I ask them to a photo? Before assembling for a group photo here with the social entrepreneurs and the presidents, I just would like to stress again how important it is to have such courageous people devoting their lives in a practical way to bring social innovation to the many problems which we discussed. I would like to thank again the presidents for having participated and come to us. I think it was a most valuable discussion, and I would like to thank particularly President Uribe for because we don't see you anymore here this afternoon, for the great hospitality and the support and cooperation which we had in organizing this meeting. And now, let's do a group photo, please.